So it has been a hot second since we have done a general plant care video, but today I have one of my all-time favorite plants here, the Black Pagoda Lipstick Plant. Now from far away you might be looking and thinking that this plant's kind of boring, but the crowning characteristic of the Black Pagoda is that when you get up close to the leaves, it almost has this lightning bolt style pattern on it. And thinking about who this plant's good for in general, I mean, first of all, I guess I would say everyone, but it's really great for people who have sunny locations in their house, don't want to worry a lot about watering, and if you're a beginner, I think it's a really good first plant for you to consider. So whether you have one of these or whether you're thinking about getting one of these, let's get into everything you're going to need to know how to keep this guy happy and healthy. Now these plants are native to tropical Asia, but as somebody who lives in Arizona and has super low humidity in their house, start out by saying that this plant is perfect for people who do not have the humidity for all those cool plants that you see on Instagram. And from there, I guess that'll kind of take us into watering. Overall, I'll say this plant's watering needs are pretty low. I find myself watering in about every 1.5 to 2 weeks. And I know sometimes you guys in the comments want like an exact number of days in between when you're supposed to water. This is my little PSA side tangent right now, which is that there is no such thing as an exact number of days for any plant to get watered. Ultimately, it's going to depend on a ton of things like the temperature of your home, the humidity of your home, how much light it's getting. But with that said, the cool thing about the Black Pagoda is that it's really easy to sense when it needs water just by touching its leaves. If you have Hoyas, I'd say that the leaves are just a little bit thinner but very similar to that texture when they're fully watered. They're going to be really plump and pretty thick. However, if you don't have a Hoya and don't know what to mark that as, if you look for a mature leaf on your plant, and just give it a little fold test. If it folds in half super easily and feels kind of weak, it's probably time for watering. And on the flip side, if it's pretty thick and you don't feel like you want to bend it anymore or it's going to snap in half, then it's probably good on watering. My plant right now is getting pretty close, but I did a final finger check in the soil and it's still kind of damp. Personally for me, I really like to let these guys get to a critical dryness just to make sure that I'm not overwatering. I also have my curly lipstick plant here with me, and because of my history with this plant, I kind of like to err on the side of underwatering. My mother planted this one, I actually ended up giving root rot, and what you're looking at right now is actually propagation of that mother plant. So it's been going much better with those infrequent waterings on these guys, but definitely keep in mind that if you do keep it too consistently wet, that you can give it some root rot in there. Real quick to go off of that, just the soil that you're going to want to put in there is going to be something that's well draining, really airy. The one that I have in here is super chunky and just lets the water really drain right through it. Now you'll see that I have one of these just smart plant potters in here inside my cover pot, and I really recommend these for any plant that you have that's going to be something that doesn't like to sit in water. Just making sure that you have something that has really good drainage in the bottom, even if you have a decorative cover pot over it, that if it's anything like in this case, it does not have a drainage hole in the bottom. Moving into light requirements. Personally, I keep this right pushed up against one of my windows that gets a super bright light in it all day. Now, I hear a lot of people talk about these and say that they can't tolerate full sun. And while I would be hesitant to put this plant directly outside, especially with how crazy our sun is here, personally, I've never found it to be too much sun where I have it. In fact, in my last apartment, I had it in what I was considering pretty good lighting, and while it always stayed alive there, it never really thrived. Since moving it into a place with a lot of light, I've really seen the growth on this plant take off, and I've actually recently had it flowered. And I think that's one of the interesting things to note about this lipstick plant in particular. In case you didn't know, lipstick plants are actually called lipstick plants, not because you can make lipstick with them, though that would be super cool if you could, but actually because their flowers look like little tubes of lipstick, with the exception of the Black Pagoda. So when I recently had this plant flower for me, honestly what they looked like to me were like the little pictures on pitcher plants. It was kind of like a greenish yellow flower. It wasn't super impressive, but it was the first time that I personally ever had this plant flower for me, so it was really exciting. So if you're feeling like your plant's kind of not growing at all, or if you're not getting it to bloom, try bumping up that lighting and it should help with that problem. As for propagation on these, I've never personally propagated this lipstick plant in particular, but again, as I had mentioned earlier, I did propagate this plant from the mother plant that I originally had that got root rot. I propagated it right in the soil and that seemed to work for me. And I actually have a full care video on my channel. At the time, I wasn't sure if you were able to propagate lipstick plants in water, although I do remember somebody leaving a comment down below that you could actually propagate these in water. So it seems like whatever method you prefer, you're going to be able to do it. As always, just make sure that you're cutting below a node. And something interesting to note about these plants is that as the plant matures, it's going to start to get these woody stalks on the stem. The more mature they are, the newer stems are just kind of a green color, and then they slowly transition over time. So again, never personally propagated this plant, but from what I hear from other plants, traditionally you're going to have better luck with propagation on those newer stems as opposed to those woodier stems. So if you're looking to do it, I would recommend cutting it from the top of those tips. As for how big these guys can get, personally, from what I've seen, it seems like they max out at about this length, maybe a little bit longer, but it's not going to be something like, you know, a string of hearts where it just grows forever. Although, as you can probably see, this plant is pretty bushy on the top, and it really just continues to put out new vines over time. One additional thing I forgot to mention mention when I talked about propagation on these is that the root systems I find to be very shallow and very, I guess, just not interconnected. Basically what I mean by that is I find it very easy that if you pull on any of these stems at their base, you can usually pull them right out of the soil pretty easily. So if your plant's getting big and full and you want to give some to a friend, you can usually kind of just shake it out of the pot and divide off some of those sections super easily. And in terms of pests, I have never had an issue with this plant. Again, not only do I think this plant's beautiful, but I just overall think it's so low maintenance. And if you're somebody who's a little bit on the lazy side like me, that is the perfect type of plant. Overall, I think that's everything I have to say about the Black Pagoda Lipstick Plant. But if you have any questions that I didn't answer, of course, drop them down below. And if you like learning about the Black Pagoda, then go check out my video on the curly lipstick plant after this one. But first, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you guys so much for sticking around until the end, and I hope to see you in the next video.